What your brain can do. Due to technological innovation, there have been very recent and rapid advances in our understanding of how the human brain works. In this video, we will explain some of the newest scientific evidence about the brain. We will also show you how this research helps us to understand how we carry out simple daily activities, as well as more complex tasks such as studying for your degree at the University of Essex. At the end, we will ask you to answer a few simple questions and write a short essay about the main messages contained in this video. You'll be offered a monetary reward for each correct answer and for writing the text.
We have known for some time that different areas of the brain have different specialties. A large part of our knowledge is derived from studies of the brains of dead people, or lesion studies. That is, studies of people who had experienced traumas in specific areas of their brain. One of the earliest and most famous studies which gave popularity to the idea of brain specialization is based on the case of Phineas Gage. He was a rail worker who in 1848 was the victim of an accident. An explosion drove a large iron rod through his head, destroying his left frontal lobe. He recovered with no apparent sensory, motor, or gross cognitive problems, but with behavior so altered that friends described him as no longer being Gage. This suggested that the damaged areas are involved in higher functions, such as personality. So new imaging techniques, such as the functional MRI or fMRI, can now provide much more detailed information on how the brain of living and healthy individuals work.
So let's explore how the brain works. Your brain contains billions of nerve cells called neurons. The interactions between neurons enable people to think, move, feel emotions and engage in complex reasoning. A neuron is a specialized cell that can produce different actions because of its precise connections with other neurons, sensory receptors and muscle cells. A synapse is a structure that permits a neuron to pass an electrical or chemical signal to another neuron. An average neuron forms approximately 1,000 synapses with other neurons. It has been estimated that there are more synapses in the human brain than there are stars in our galaxy. Most of the neurons are located in your cerebrum, the largest part of your brain. The outermost layer of the cerebrum is the cerebral cortex, the grey matter of the brain. Deep folds and wrinkles in the brain increase the surface area of grey matter, so more information can be processed. The hemispheres communicate with each other through a thick tract of nerves that runs between them. The brain can be divided into several sections: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, cerebellum and brainstem, amongst others.
Let's now think more specifically about the different functions of the brain. The frontal lobes are considered our emotional control center and home to our personality. The frontal lobes are involved in motor function, problem solving, spontaneity, memory, language, initiation, judgment, impulse control, and social and sexual behavior. This is your brain's mastermind. When you are making long-term plans or deciding where to go, you are doing it with your frontal lobe. Now, fluid intelligence is the ability to think logically and to solve problems in new situations, regardless of previously acquired knowledge. There is a strong association between fluid intelligence and injuries in the frontal lobe area of the brain.
The parietal lobe is the part of the brain that processes basic sensations like temperature, pressure, touch and pain. This lobe enables the brain to discriminate the intensity of a stimulus, such as cold versus freezing or lukewarm versus scalding hot. Some sections are responsible for skills like reading, writing, calculation and right-left orientation. A stroke affecting the right parietal lobe can lead to neglect for the left side of the visual field, causing a patient to behave as if the left side of sensory space is non-existent. This patient might fail to eat the food on the left half of their plate. If asked to draw a clock, his drawing might show only the numbers 12 to 6, or all 12 of the numbers might be on one half of the clock face, with the other half distorted or blank. The patient might also ignore the left side of their body. For instance, they might shave only the right side.
The occipital lobes are the centre of our visual perception system. We distinguish different areas labelled with a V for vision and a number. V1 is the primary visual cortex. It receives input from the optic tract. It has a clear map of visual information that corresponds to the areas of the retina. V2 detects more complex features, such as contours. V3 gets inputs from both V1 and V2. It appears to specialise in depth, distance and global motion. V4 is also called the colour area, although it is not the only area where colour information is processed. V5 processes complex motion. Although this is the vision area of the brain, it is interesting to see how it is activated when blind subjects perform tactile tasks, such as reading Braille. What is also interesting is that the visual cortex can take over non-visual functions extremely quickly. For instance, this happens in blindfolded subjects after only 6 days of visual deprivation.
The temporal lobe is responsible for hearing and for producing language, but also has important memory functions. The upper part of the temporal lobe is the primary auditory cortex, which receives input from the ear. The areas around it are devoted to interpreting sounds, and one of these in particular is known to be specialised for the understanding of language. Another area sits near the occipital lobe. In the left hemisphere, it is responsible for word and number recognition. In the right hemisphere, it is responsible for the ability to recognise faces. Inner areas of the temporal lobes are closely connected to the hippocampus and are devoted to memory for life events. Henri Gustave Malleson, known to the world as patient HM, is perhaps the most important patient in the history of brain science. He was suffering from severe epilepsy, and this was so debilitating that in 1953, at the age of 27, he agreed to undergo experimental surgical treatment. The surgeon removed part of his temporal lobes. After the operation, Henri could remember much of his childhood, but he struggled to remember events which happened 10 years before his surgery. Henri had also lost the ability to form new memories. Later, he would describe his condition as being like waking from a dream. Every day is alone in itself. Henri worked with a team of scientists until his death, at the age of 82, although he never got to remember their names. Thanks to progress made in neuroscience over the last few decades, today we have a better understanding of how our brain works. For example, we know that people with damage in the frontal lobe have trouble with abstract decisions, such as whether to go out for a walk or not, whereas people with damage in the occipital lobe have trouble with concrete decisions, like moving towards the front door. And for something which is closer to your experience, to become a student at the University of Essex, you have used all of these areas of your brain. To decide to apply to university, you used your frontal lobe, involved in long-term decision making. To study for your A-levels, you had to understand what your teachers at school were telling you. You relied on your temporal lobe, critical to speech comprehension. You had to read books and write essays, relying on your parietal lobe, which helped for reading and writing. You had to see the blackboard in school, relying on your occipital lobes, which is the centre of your visual perception system. To memorise the material, you used your temporal lobe, critical to long-term memory.
Understanding more about how the different parts of the brain work means we can try to help individuals who have suffered traumas to the brain or who are affected by neurological disorders or mental illnesses. And we can try to understand how different brain functions develop over the course of our lives and when individuals can be expected to make important decisions with long-term consequences. We can use our knowledge of the factors that impair brain development, such as alcohol, drug abuse, and emotional deprivation, to understand what factors could promote healthy development or optimal learning.